So rule number 5 is the end game is not the ship setting sail. And what we mean by that is that, and we mean this in both extremes, like your ship coming together doesn't have to be the end of the story. And that's not the happily ever after moment. I mean, some people do treat it that way, but it's like, it's so much more interesting to see that character dynamic grow and develop, like we see, like you had mentioned in Bunny Girl Senpai, like watching that grow and develop, or on the opposite side, like leaving it open to even be like, do they actually end up getting together? Like that kind of stuff is a lot of fun because it lets authors and like other shippers like actually kind of formulate their own headcanon and such. And so it's something that you need to keep in mind is that there's a lot more than just the climax of whatever you're shooting for.
Yeah, and especially depending on what kind of story. If you're doing like a fantasy world where there is going to be a lot of world building, that romance is not going to be your main focus. At least it shouldn't be.
Exactly. And on the subject of like fantasy, I'm going to use an example right here. Like this is somewhat painful for me to use, but looking at the Inheritance Cycle, the Iragon books.
Oh baby.
Oh boy, the axe I have to grind with them. Here, like, there's so much that can be said about Iragon and Arya by the end of that series. Should they have gotten together? Should they not have? Yada yada yada. Spoiler alert: they don't. But literally, the ship sets sail, which is kind of funny because he sails on a ship to leave the continent. Not really, because he just goes to the other side. It's so weird. But one of the things is that at first, when I first read that, I was upset because my ship didn't sail at the end. Oh, how terrible. And that clouded how I viewed the ending of the series. I still think it's a garbage ending, but going back to it and trying to divorce the whole shipping aspect from what happens, I began to realize that the ending was really unsatisfactory for a number of reasons, and not just simply the ship. And had they stayed together, had Arya sailed off with Iragon into the distant horizon to be with him, it still actually would have been a bad ending because the rest of the end game was not wrapped up in a way that was very satisfactory. It was too open-ended, with too much left unresolved. And so like it's a dangerous line when it comes to relationships, where people either say that the relationship is paramount to the ending, or where they're all like, hey, you know what? I didn't have them get together. Look at that. I subverted your expectations. Love my ending. And it's just like, no, just because you subverted my expectations in the romance department doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good ending.
Yeah.
Right.
The ending needs to be its own thing. Romance is just the spice.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, I've seen stories, in fact, my favorite book kind of does that, where like the very end of the book, very end of the series, it ends with some sort of romance, whatever. And I'm talking about the Bulgarian, which is my favorite book series. At the very last scene, it alludes to the two main love interests having sex, but then you realize after you read the next connected series, oh, it's just preparing for everything that's going to happen there kind of idea, because they end up having a son, and the son ends up involved with a lot of the stuff in the second series. So it's kind of just a connection between the two. But I've seen a lot of cases where, oh, there's a wedding, or they're like off on a honeymoon, or you get the idea, and that's the end of the show, and it really has no purpose in the overall story.
Yeah. So yeah, shipping the ship setting sail is not the end game, just part of it.